Welcome back to BeFM Drama, where we turn great literature into gripping radio. I'm your host, Joshua Cornwell, and today we're bringing you part 4 in our 5-part adaptation of the Six Napoleons, a classic Sherlock Holmes story from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. A bizarre series of burglaries has swept London, centered on the theft and destruction of a worthless set of 6 identical plaster busts of Napoleon scattered throughout London. Once the odd but seemingly harmless robberies escalated to involve the murder of an Italian Mafioso, Holmes joined the investigation and traced the history of the 6 busts from their owners to the shops that sold them and to the manufacturer that produced them. Inspector Lestrade has connected the case to an Italian laborer named Beppo, and Holmes is preparing a trap to catch the criminal in the act. Lestrade looked at Sherlock Holmes with some surprise when he suggested that the solution to the case might lie in Chiswick, but my friend took no notice.
If you'll come with me to Chiswick tonight, Lestrade, I'll promise to go to the Italian quarter with you tomorrow, and no harm will be done by the delay. And now I think a few hours' sleep would do us all good, for I propose to leave after 11 o'clock, and it's unlikely we shall be home again before morning. You'll eat with us, Lestrade, and then you are welcome to our sofa until it's time for us to begin. In the meantime, Watson, I would be glad if you would send for an express messenger, as I have a letter to send, and it is important it goes out at once.
Holmes spent the evening rummaging through the files of the old daily papers he'd packed into the spare room. When he at last emerged, it was with triumph in his eyes, but he said nothing to either of us about the result of his research. For my own part, I had followed step by step the methods by which he had traced the windings of this complex case, and though I could not yet understand the goal we would reach, I understood clearly that Holmes expected this grotesque criminal to make an attempt upon the 2 remaining busts, one of which, I remembered, was in Chiswick. No doubt the object of our journey was to catch him in the act, and I could not help admiring the cunning way my friend had led the journalist Horace Harker to insert a wrong clue into the evening paper, so as to give the criminal the idea that the police were on the wrong track and that he could continue his plans in safety. I was not surprised when Holmes suggested that I should take my revolver with me. He had himself picked up the lead-loaded hunting crop, which was his own favorite weapon. A 4-wheeler was waiting by the door at 11, and in it we drove to a spot on the other side of Hammersmith Bridge. Here the cabman was directed to wait. A short walk brought us to a secluded road fringed with pleasant houses, each standing on its own grounds. In the light of a street lamp, we read Laburnum Villa upon the gateposts of one of them. The occupants had evidently retired to bed, for all was dark except a light over the hall door, which shed a single blurred circle onto the garden path. The wooden fence which separated the grounds from the road cast a dense black shadow upon the inner side, and here it was that we crouched.
I fear that we'll have a long wait. We may thank our stars that it is not raining. I don't think we can even venture to smoke to pass the time, but it's a 50-50 chance we get something to pay us back for our trouble.
It proved, however, that our vigil was not to be as long as Holmes feared, and it ended in a very sudden and dramatic fashion. In an instant, without the smallest sound to warn us of his coming, the garden gate swung open, and a lithe, dark figure, as swift and active as a cat, rushed up the garden path. We saw it whisk past the light thrown from the door lamp and disappear against the black shadow of the house. There was a long pause, during which we held our breath, and then a very gentle creaking sound came to our ears. The window was being opened. The noise ceased, and again there was a long silence. The fellow was making his way into the house. We saw the sudden flash of a shaded lantern inside the room.
Let us get to the open window. We'll nab him as he climbs out.
But before we could move, the man had emerged again. As he came out into the glimmering patch of light, we saw that he carried something white under his arm. He looked stealthily all around. The silence of the deserted street reassured him. Turning his back to us, he laid down his burden, and the next instant there was the sound of a sharp tap, followed by a clatter and a rattle. The man was so intent upon what he was doing that he never heard our steps as we crept across the grass plot. Then, leaping like a tiger, Holmes was on his back, and an instant later Lestrade and I had him by either wrist, and the handcuffs had been fastened. As we turned him over, I saw a furious, sun-browned face with writhing features glaring up at us, and I knew that it was indeed the man in the photograph whom we had secured. But it was not our prisoner to whom Holmes was giving his attention. Squatting on the doorstep, he was engaged in a most careful examination of what the man had brought out of the house. It was a bust of Napoleon, like the ones we had seen that morning, and it had been broken into similar fragments. Carefully, Holmes held up each separate shard to the light, but in no way did it differ from any other shattered piece of plaster. He had just completed his examination when the hall lights lit up and the door opened, and the owner of the house, a jovial, rotund figure in shirt and trousers, presented himself.
Mr. Josiah Brown, I suppose?
Yes, sir. And you, no doubt, are Mr. Sherlock Holmes? I had the note which you sent by the express messenger, and I did exactly what you told me. We locked every door on the inside and awaited developments. Well, I'm very glad to see that you got the rascal. I hope, gentlemen, that you will come in and have some drinks.
We had to turn him down, for Lestrade was anxious to get his prisoner into safe custody. Within a few minutes, our cab had been summoned, and the four of us were on our way to central London. Our captive wouldn't say a word, but he glared at us from the shadow of his matted hair, and once, when my hand seemed within his reach, he snapped at it like a hungry wolf with his teeth. We stayed long enough at the police station to learn that a search of his clothing revealed nothing but a few shillings and a long sheath knife, the handle of which bore copious traces of recent blood.
We'll have him identified in no time, though I have no doubt it's this Beppo fellow. You'll find that my theory of the Mafia will work out all right, but I am exceedingly obliged to you, Mr. Holmes, for the workmanlike way in which you had laid hands on him. I admit, I don't quite understand it all yet.
I fear it is rather too late in the night for explanations, and besides, there are one or two details which are not yet resolved, and it is one of those cases which are worth working out to the very end. If you'll come round again to my rooms in Baker Street at 6 o'clock tomorrow, I think that I shall be able to demonstrate that even now you have not grasped the entire meaning of this business, which presents some features which make it absolutely original in the history of crime. If ever I permit you to chronicle any more of my little problems, Watson, I foresee that you will enliven your pages with an account of this odd adventure of the Napoleonic busts.
When we met again next evening, Lestrade provided us with much information concerning our prisoner. His name, it appeared, was indeed Beppo, his family name unknown. He was a well-known ne'er-do-well among the Italian community. He had once been a skillful sculptor and had earned an honest living, but he had taken a criminal course and had twice already been in jail, once for petty theft and once, as we had already heard, for stabbing a fellow countryman. He could speak English perfectly well. His reasons for destroying the busts were still unknown, and he refused to answer any question about the subject. But the police had discovered that the busts might very well have been made by his own hands, since he had been engaged in that class of work at the establishment of Gelder & Co. when they were manufactured. To all this information, much of which we already knew, Holmes listened with polite attention. But I, who knew him so well, could clearly see that his thoughts were elsewhere, and I detected a mixture of mingled uneasiness and expectation beneath that mask which he often wore. At last he jerked from his chair, and his eyes brightened. There had been a ring at the bell. With that, we've come to the end of Part 4 in our 5-part adaptation of the Six Napoleons here on BeFM Drama. The criminal responsible for the bizarre series of robberies and the murder of Pietro Venucci, a criminal member of the Italian Mafia, has been identified as the laborer Beppo. But the reasons why he targeted the 6 worthless busts of Napoleon around London in the first place remain unclear. Join us again tomorrow evening for our final episode of the Six Napoleons as we answer these questions and more here on BeFM Drama.